Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Framework Podcast. I'm one of your two co-hosts, Ana Trujillo Limon, joined with Jamie Hopkins, and today we're happy to have Lorne Jenkins, the CEO and founder of Mini Money Management. Welcome, Lorne, to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, real quick, talk to us about the quick 30 seconds of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Lorne, and I teach kids and people about money. So Mini Money came from a game that like my mom played with me growing up, and pretty much through life, you kind of just see how many people don't understand the basic concepts of money. And I came from the finance world, and instead of complaining about it, I decided to try and start a company, and well, I have started a company, and yeah, so that's pretty much all we do. Just teach people about the basics of money and how it works.
That's awesome. And another fun question we always like to start with is, what's your favorite food or your favorite thing about food or your current food obsession?
Ooh, I like live next to this birria truck, and I've probably gone to get birria like four times in the last like week and a half. Yeah, that's really been hitting lately. And also, I have like a deep passion for breakfast burritos. I try to eat breakfast burritos like 2 to 3 times a week. Like it's just a great way to start the day.
What's your favorite breakfast burrito stuffing? Like
You
what's
know
the
what?
ideal
Chorizo.
mix?
I actually think like chorizo is super underrated and everybody like loves bacon. It's not that bacon's bad, but I think like
Mhm.
chorizo in a solid breakfast burrito is yeah, you like can't beat it.
I'm more of a fan of the chorizo in it too. I actually think bacon's a little overrated because everything that just tastes like bacon, you don't get the other flavors. And chorizo does a better job of mixing in with other flavors. Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
Your palate is more refined. That's what it is.
Something like that. And so you went to Campbell. We were talking about this before we recorded. Did Campbell have good food? Because like obviously you couldn't go like there wasn't a bunch of stuff around there in North Carolina. So like was campus food pretty good there?
No, hopefully they don't get mad about that when they like if they hear this. The campus food wasn't good, but I will say it changed my opinion on barbecue. So like any like because we were talking about this before, like we were out in the sticks, and then when you have like a small little mom and pop barbecue shop that's like 5 minutes off campus, and they can make some barbecue out there, but the campus food, nah, not that great.
Yeah, so the did you I'm trying to think. So I know Carolina barbecue, it's a little bit different depending on where you are, right? So like is that more of the like vinegar based one down there? And yeah,
Mhm.
cuz I think up north, further North Carolina it's a little bit different, but that's like the classic vinegar one down there.
And I didn't realize what I was missing until I had it and then tried to come back and eat barbecue, and I was like, "Wait a minute. Like, this is not the same type of food that we were eating." And honestly, I think it's the sides. Like, they do their sides with, like, so much love, and I figured out the glory of, banana pudding. So, like, I would probably eat, like, 2 to 3 helpings. Like, they would always make extra banana pudding and, like, give me a to-go cup. So that was yeah, no, I love it.
That's great. So you brought this up at the beginning. What's your, kind of going back to your money memories? Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, obviously, as you said, some of it probably came from games, but do you have a first money memory that sticks out, or was it this kind of childhood interaction?
I'll say like so where it all started, and I always have to give my mom a plug. Is that it's like she got fed up with us asking to go out to eat every day. So we were like 9 and 6, and we said, listen, like we want to go out to eat, we want to go out to eat, and it was just because we didn't have a concept of the value of money. And so she gave us job interviews. We had to like apply to be a son and a daughter. Like she called our references, and we ended up getting hired. And so we got paid a salary every week, and then we had to pay for rent. We had to pay for like transportation to school, and it was more expensive to go out to eat than it was to stay at home. And so her claim to fame is that by the time we got to the end of the summer, she asked us, "Hey, like, do you guys want to go out to eat?" And we're like, "Nah, that's way too expensive." And so, but for me, I guess like that was just my upbringing. And so when I was going to choose like the school that I was going to, I remember I had a coach say like, "Well, which school offered you the most money?" And I was like, "Well, Campbell." And so for us, it was a no-brainer of like, well, you go where school is the cheapest. Like it may not be a huge name school, but A, I was competing at a Division 1 level, and two, I was getting a majority of actually all my school paid for. And I had a bunch of friends who I was running track with at the time who turned down scholarship offers from smaller schools. And to me, it was just like, how is that even an option. But like, and again, because of how I was raised. And so that was the first time I was kind of seeing like, okay, our money like we have slight differences in money. I also went to a pretty rich high school, and like I had a job through high school, and like not that like we were fine off, but I wasn't a trust fund baby. So to me, it was just like, okay, I don't have that much money, so I can't spend it. These kids have the money, so they can spend it. And like to me, that's just how simple it was. I think once I'd say I really started to notice like a big difference when I went to London. So I did my undergrad for the first 4 years in North Carolina, but then I went out and did my master's in the UK. And so I was starting my master's when a lot of kids were starting their like their opening college careers, education. Um, and they have I tell the story. They have a party, and so the biggest mall in Europe is in East London, and they shut that mall down to everybody except for students, and they call it Loan Drop Day. And so it's the day that everybody's student loan hits their accounts, and everything in the mall is between 30 to 50% off. All the restaurants are cheaper. You're getting like good drinks, you're partying, you're buying clothes. And I'm sitting here like, this is the money you have to put towards your tuition. Like this, and you just bought like, and I actually had a friend who bought like 5 or 6 pairs of Jordans. And I remember sitting there like,
What is happening?
how can you do this? Like, how does that make sense? But the more that we got to know each other, he was a first generation college student. No one had ever taught him like, because that's the most money he'd ever seen in his entire life. And so if you don't teach kid like it's super great to get kids to school, but that's when I was like, okay, well, like if you can't stay in school because you can't afford it, it doesn't really matter if we can get you into college type of thing. And so I think that was where I really start to remember thinking like, okay, maybe I did grow up with like a great financial background and I just didn't know it. It wasn't necessarily, I didn't have a trust fund, but I had like the ability and the knowledge to then like go potentially give my kids a trust fund, if that makes sense. And that was when it started to click. And then moving into finance was like a whole, yeah, that's when you really realize how much financial literacy matters.
Those are all really great points. I went to a private school and I was a scholarship kid. And so like all of my friends were first generation students. And I didn't have a ton of student loans in undergrad. So like, but my friends would get their loan money, like, oh, let's go shopping. I was like, wait, what? I don't have any money to go shopping. Like, so, but yeah, that's good. That's a crazy point. And it sounds like a very wise coach you had in high school. But
He was.
my next question is, so when you were growing up, what did you want to be when you grew up? Was it in the finance realm, or like tell us about like kind of what you wanted to be in your journey to get where you are now?
Yeah, I had no idea. And this is also like a piece of like why we do a piece of like mini money is that like so my mom is an attorney, my pops was an engineer, and so I was like I can either go to the NBA, I can be a comedian, I can sing, or I can be an attorney, or I could be an engineer. And so like because again those were just the only job options that I knew were available. And so I picked my major as business because I was like, well, I'm good at talking to people, and business sounds like it makes money. So like I didn't really know what I wanted to do growing up. I just kind of knew like I guess the feeling that I wanted to have. And so for me, I was big in sports. And so I knew that I had a very rude awakening, probably around 17 or 18, where I was like, I don't think I'm going to be an Olympian, like, which is okay. Like, I was still going to have a good college career. But from like a young age to then, it was always like, get good grades, be good at sports, get to college. And then after that, it was like, you'll figure it out. And so my thing was always like, get good grades, stay in school, like be good at sports. And that was really what I like put my focus on. And so I think it was very interesting after I graduated thinking like, okay, like I kind of did it. Like, you know what I mean? I stayed in school. I played sports. Like
Now
now what do I
what?
do? And so that was a big reason why I went over to the UK because it was like, well, I know what I don't want to do. Like I grew up in a somewhat small town. I like ran track in a small town. I was like, let me go to the biggest city I can find. And then on top of that, it was like the amount, like the massive difference from like Colorado to North Carolina. Like it's just they talk different, they ate different, like they acted different. But I stayed in the same country, and I was like, there's so much that like I just don't know yet. And so for me, it was like I put my like 4 years of undergrad into like my 1 year of my master's degree in the UK, and I kind of got to figure out like, okay, finance and economics like makes sense to me, numbers click. And so I think like I'm still figuring out what I want to what I want to be when I grow up. But yeah, no, I never really had like a vision, outside of like going to the NBA, of course, but that didn't happen.
Just you weren't a good enough spot up shooter out there.
You know what? It's that's and that and I yeah, no. Basketball is if you're not 6'8", it's just not it's just not gonna happen for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what did you yes, yes, they say like when I was at Davidson, Curry was there. And so but if you saw Curry that first year, nobody thought he was going to the NBA either. You know, he was like 145 pounds probably like
That is very
yeah,
true.
it was fun watching him play and yeah. The so when you went to London, I mean, what was probably the biggest takeaway, right? You said, "Hey, look, I'm going to go out here and learn and experience more of the world." And, you know, hopefully you actually did come back with an experience that moved you forward. Was there something where you just kind of got a takeaway or something in your mind from that experience that was different?
Um how many different cultures there were.
Mhm.
I think that especially like just leaving and being in a city like London where it's just like a massive melting pot. And I think like just seeing the different ways that people can like either be raised or live their life and still be like a functioning member of society. So like there's not one right way to do it. Like I had friends who waited tables and had like paid their rent for the last few years and then went back to school. You have like the same group of like there's just so many different ways that you can do life. I feel like it puts things into perspective. So like also being more patient with myself because I had
Mhm.
friends in like my late like in their early 30s, like getting into their mid 30s and like yeah, I'm still figuring out what I want to be in life, but they were happy. And so I think like it just opened my eyes a to see that there's different cultures, there's different ways to do things like and I always the one of the craziest conversations I had was like I would get made fun of relentlessly for having to pay for healthcare and that there's guns. Like people would say like, oh, what's it like to pay for healthcare? Like they make fun of people in the US for things that are like basic rights to them. And so for me it was like and again, not to get like too political or anything like that, but to be in a spot where like healthcare was just expected from them, it was like, okay, so it can like there's other ways that you can live. And it's not just like, it's not just the American way to do it.
Mhm.
And like soccer, football is the best sport in the world. I think that was also a massive takeaway. Is like it truly is the best sport in the world.
Did you
Yeah.
go to games out there?
Yeah, I went to games all this. So the first game I went to a Bayern Munich versus Dortmund game, which is like the biggest rivalry in Germany, and that like just lit a fire because it was just like the passion that like the fans have for the game and like the way that they feed into like the players and like there's history to the clubs. It's just no, it's a beautiful, beautiful sport.
Yeah, if there were snacks involved, then I would definitely go to the game, but not a huge sports person. I like to play sports. I don't really follow anything. But Lauren, talk to us about how many money management came about and the evolution and how you're getting it up and running.
Yeah. So I I got deported from the UK in July of 2019.
Okay.
So I was working my job in finance, like economics and finance, like at undergrad and masters, went into working in foreign exchange. So I was a foreign exchange broker. I was making really decent money. But the thing that I saw in that journey is how many people were just financially uneducated
Mhm,
and how essentially like a lot of pieces of finance are just people making money on knowing more about money than other people do.
mhm,
And so I think I always thought, I guess to be fair, growing up, I always thought I was gonna like make a positive impact. I didn't know what it was gonna be, but I was like, listen, let's go help people. Let's like go make a change. Let's go do something good. And I think what we were doing in finance was just neutral. Like we weren't hurting people necessarily, but we also weren't helping all the time. And so for me, it was kind of and so I ended up leaving that job before I had another job, aka I got deported, came back to the US. And I remember I had a job interview and it was for a very similar position, like still in finance, still doing the same type of thing. And I had to like kind of have an internal conversation of like, well, if there's ever a time to try to do something like crazy, it would be now. Like I don't have a wife, I don't have any kids. I like just moved back home. So like, why not? And so I actually ended up talking to my old fourth grade teacher and was just kind of like, hey, like this is a game that my mom played with me growing up. Back in the day, she tried to do it with other parents. Like my mom's been an entrepreneur since. I didn't know what an entrepreneur was until like I read the definition. I was like, oh, like my mom's been doing that since I was a kid. Like we just call it a side hustle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so she had like tried to start it with other parents a couple times. And I was like, well, why don't we try to start it in schools? Like teachers need to teach financial literacy. And so we ended up having like a 3 hour conversation with my fourth grade teacher. And he's like, well, you should turn it into an app. You should do this. You should do that. And that's really where it started. And I mean, where where we are now versus where it started is massively different. But I think it just all kind of stemmed um, being a little bit naive for sure. I did not know what I was getting into, but you never really do when you start a company. But two, of just like trying to do something positive and not. We always say like, don't talk about it, be about it. That was what we would always say in track is like, if you really want to see something get done, then go do it. And so I was like, I'm either going to sit here and complain about people not knowing about money, or I'm going to at least give it a shot to try and teach people about money.
Mhm.
And yeah, 2.5, almost 3 years later, we're still here. So it's all right.
So how many schools have you gotten into? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I've gotta get so we've gotten close to I think we're up to close to like 2,000 students.
Awesome.
So we really were like we started pretty primarily in Colorado, and so we had a classroom economy that was doing super well, and that got picked up from like teachers in like Iowa. We had like parents in India using part of the app. Like it
Mhm.
really the beauty of it being online is that anytime people liked it, they would use it. Had a bunch of FaceTime calls with people in Hawaii. Like it was really cool. And then we ended up switching because again, we had a few tech issues, and so we kind of switched to like more workshops and like writing a little bit of curriculum, and that like we got all the way down into Texas, like and a lot of like Colorado, like nonprofits. And I think the thing that's crazy is that we started out saying, okay, this is going to be like first to fifth grade, like that's what we really want to focus on. Kids learn like have an emotional response to money as early as the age of 5. Let's just really fill in this gap. But the content that we were teaching fifth graders, middle school teachers picked up, and then high school teachers picked up, and then college, like professors started picking up. And that was when you kind of like, I started to realize like nobody knows about money. Like, no, like, and it's hard for teachers to teach about money because they weren't taught about money. And if you look at the way that like math is taught, you look at the way that reading is taught, is like it's from a young age and it's through repetition. But when it comes to financial education, it's just best of luck to you. Here's maybe a textbook if you're lucky. And so I think like it's been really cool to see. And I mean, we haven't done any like direct marketing to like schools and teachers and nonprofits. It's just been them enjoying the content, enjoying the tech, enjoying the workshops, and then recommending it. And a lot of times it'll be from nonprofits who have kids of color, who have first generation college students, because they start to realize like it's not just getting kids to college; they have to be able to stay in college. Um, and so yeah, so I think it's been cool to see how more people want financial education than I initially thought, but it's just they don't know where to start.
When you look at the way to educate these students and the teachers, right? Because to some degree, you're empowering the teachers and teaching the teachers. What have you learned about the way to, I guess, communicate this education? And I'll lead in with a partial story here because I tend to do that a lot. I did a financial literacy type education event with a couple other people out in Vegas after our event Excel in September, and I think like it went okay. I feel though that I don't have a great gauge still, and part of it's repetition, doing it more, learning from people. But for people who don't have a concept of money, like I'm not a good teacher for them today, right? Like I want to go too far too fast with it is what I probably realized from that event, and like couldn't make it as relatable as I otherwise would have wanted to. So that's really kind of the question. Like, what have you learned about that from an education and making the material relatable to these students?
Um, Everybody's journey with money is going to be different,
Mhm.
and I think once you get people to understand that, the biggest hurdle that I have, I would say, is that there's such a negative connotation around budgeting and managing your finances. Everybody thinks it's a chore. I'd rather just like bury my head in the sand. And like the main like the first hurdle we have to get over, or the first hurdle we have to identify is like what is your emotional response to money? And because like that's something that we very rarely talk about. But there, like you can do psychological tests and you can see whether or not people are going to naturally either be spendthrifts or tightwads. And so they're either going to have a pause, like they're going to either get pleasure out of spending or they're going to feel pain when they spend. And once you start to have those, like once you personalize money and tell people, okay, like you're going to feel emotional about money. And then you have the conversation of what do you want to buy? And that's usually like the first or second question I lead with people, and they say, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Okay, so when I spend my money, I like to go watch soccer games. I like play my PlayStation 5. I like want to buy a new PS5. I want to like buy like earrings. Like there's different things that I buy." And so especially when you come from a place of like they're thinking, "Oh, like a 401k, go invest in your retirement, go do this." It's like that. I don't really care about that, especially when we're just getting down the basics of money.
Mhm.
Because once you start to personalize it and once people have bought in to see that, okay, if I budget, I can then buy the things that I care about. Or like this is going to lead me to the lifestyle that I want to live. And that's another thing you have to explain to people is that like so they're going to say okay the 50-30-20 budget is super great or for you everybody should save $1,000 a month from the time they're 16. It don't work like that. Like
Mhm.
because everybody has is coming from a different spot. So you have to meet people where they're at. You have to get them to the point where like they understand okay I need to save a little bit of money, I take care of my needs, and I have fun with the rest. And once you can get those basic principles down, people will run with the financial education themselves. Because I mean, you do really need to know which stock is like has been the best performing stock over the last 8 years. Nah. But if you get to the point where you have $5,000 saved up, I can get you about 15 to 20 different financial financial people who will invest that money for you. And the majority of people don't want to have to deal with money in their everyday life. Like we always say, money should be used as a tool to get you to the spot where you want to be in life. So for me, like obviously I teach people money every day, but like money for me helps me travel, coach track and field, and live the type of life that I want to live. I don't think about my budget every day. I check in on Sunday and make sure everything's like in balance, and then I keep it pushing because I don't need to be looking at my finances every day.
Mhm.
And so to kind of explain to people, like one, you have to get rid of the stigma around budgeting. You have to make money more relatable. And then two, just kind of tell people like this is your money. So whatever you want to spend it on, like I don't care what you spend your money on as long as you budget for it.
Yep.
And that's a good place to start.
I think one of the cool things too about your approach, so full disclosure, Lauren and I are working together with my husband, Jamie Limon, who was Lauren's coach in high school, the wise coach I mentioned earlier, and my brother, Mike Trujillo. We're starting a little summer fun running financial literacy club called Mini Money Runners. And so one of the coolest things about your approach was how you met with us and asked, what do the kids like? What do they, kind of just to personalize the program. And so my brother, who is their math teacher, kind of filled you in on who they are, what they might, resonate with and what might be most beneficial. So do you kind of employ that personalized approach with all the teachers in schools and nonprofits that you work with?
Yeah, that's like pretty much the only thing that we do. And I think because it's the most important.
Mhm.
Because if you can go, I mean, and COVID was a huge fail, like a huge piece of this. It's like if you don't talk to kids about stuff that they want to learn, they're going to tune out.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so you have to go in there and say, okay, if I'm talking to an entire class about you need to save up for college, you need to do this, and 80% of this classroom has no desire to go to college, you're going to tune out and you're going to think financial education or financial literacy isn't for you. But it's like when you meet people where they're at and people really start to see that like when I control my money, it helps me control other aspects of my life,
Mhm.
is when I think the conversations start to be more important. And a lot of times these sessions will be like, because again, like I could probably cover the basics of money in 20 to 30 minutes. I mean, we've got an app where it's like, hey, look, here's 8 different modules. If you want to know about like, here's a crash course on everything you should know about money. That's something that we have. And like, that's relatively easy to get out and take. But that's not really where people get the value of it. And it's not to say that that stuff doesn't help, but it really is that personalization and people seeing themselves in money. Like as weird of a comment as that is to say, because a lot of times, like especially kids of color, kids from like low income areas, is you've never seen money, you've never seen your family have money, and you start to think that you don't deserve it, or you start to think that you're always going to be poor, or you've got kids who come from high income areas and they don't have a good value on money. They think like, oh, money is just always going to be there. And so it really is like you have to figure out where kids are starting from so you can know what you have to teach them. But I mean, that's like kind of education as a whole. That just happens to apply to money as well.
I think the conversation around like what do you want to spend money on is always a good one. We're a little bit loose with our structure on the show. That's usually a question we ask right after the first money memory. It's like, what was your first big purchase? And it's a very interesting thing, right? That people, I mean, people are very different on that. And do you have one that sticks out in your mind when you were a kid, like a first purchase that was meaningful to you?
Yeah, so I think it was either my freshman or sophomore year of college. Because when I say I had no money in high school. Because I didn't get an allowance. Like, we didn't really do that. Like, I would work a summer job, but that was to pay for gas. Like, and my thing was like, it was like, you go to school, you come back, run track, come back. And I think when I got to college, I had saved up all my money and I bought a PlayStation 4, actually. And that was the first time I was like, like, I've saved up a lot of money. And my mom didn't really let me play video games growing up, which is good because I like read books and stuff. But for me, that was like my rebellious phase of like, I'm gonna play video games now. And so like to be able to like buy a PlayStation and like a TV with my own money was like huge and like super empowering. And like, yeah, to a lot of people, you're like, okay, that's a video game system. But to like an 18, 19-year-old kid who saved it, like that's when then gets you in the habit of like being financially literate because you're like, okay, I can do it with a PlayStation. And then this last year I had enough money saved up to buy a car. And so it's like, yeah, it just it goes and it goes and it goes. But you got to start at something that you care about. And for me, it was video games.
Did you have a go to game then where you brought up NBA, so your NBA. Did they have NBA 2K? I guess then on yeah.
Yes, I was always okay at
Okay.
2K. NCAA football was big then, and it was one of the like last 2 years that they had made
Yeah.
it, and that was yeah, it was real tough.
So
And then actually FIFA. Yeah,
okay.
FIFA.
I was like, it dates me a little bit. I was really, really good at NCAA 2004 edition. That was my
Okay.
best year. Just yeah, I excelled at that one. A couple years later, I wasn't as good. Just they had fixed some of the glitches that I was pretty good at exploiting back then. And yeah, I was NCAA 2004. But
Rumor has it they're bringing it back around because
they can pay the
now they
people.
can pay
Yeah.
college kids. Yeah. So fingers crossed.
Well, I'd love your thoughts on that. That's actually a really fun topic, right? NIL, paying college kids, like, the advisory world is like super interested in this because kind of interestingly, two things occurred almost at the exact same time. So the SEC more or less loosened the rules for advisors to get endorsements and pay people for, websites, things like that, celebrities. So you're going to see more and more celebrities and other people like endorsing financial services. Whether or not that's a good thing in the long run, debatable, right? But the door has been opened, and at the same time, right, we got this college students can now get paid, right, for their likeness and NIL, and there's probably a lot of mixes on that too, on whether or not that'll be alone a good thing, right? Because I think that there's probably some concerns like giving a bunch of people money without the education. Where does that put us, right? And I think that's probably a good question for you. Like, how do you view that? Both the topic of NIL and also, what do you think we should add to that? Because I think that's my biggest concern. I think about like 18-year-old me. I was a swimmer, so they don't give swimmers NIL money very much, probably moving into the future. But I don't think that I would have benefited in life from having like $100,000 when I was 18, like handed to me as like cash, right? Like it probably wouldn't have been like I would have had 4 PlayStation 4s, like everyone in the hall would have had them, right? Like so we could all and like hook up and yeah.
That's a good question. So I think it's almost like two different conversations. So anytime that you give people money, I think it should come with education. So like I would make the same argument about like programs that pull kids out of college and like, the training programs where you make 60, 70, 80K afterwards. I think it's still doing a disservice to those people, those kids, to not teach them about financial literacy. Like, yeah. And so I think that for that to be an argument for some people, like, oh, these kids are going to blow it. Okay, but that's a totally different argument. Like, so maybe we should fix the education system so that they don't blow it. I think and again, like as a former college athlete, such a small percentage of college athletes make it, right? But how much does a school benefit from them? Like, and if you look at it, you can churn through student athletes just like this. It means nothing to these universities. As much as they say they care about these kids and they care about, if you tear your ACL, you won't see that kid next year. Simple as though. You can't tell me that colleges really care about kids. So the very least you could do is at least pay them while they're there. And now, does that need to come with a bunch of financial education, or do we need to educate people on how to use it? Of course. But the amount of value and honestly effort and time that you put into it, like my knees are still bad from college track. And again, college track athletes probably aren't going to be the ones who get paid. But if there are people, if there are young men and women out there who are bringing millions and millions of dollars into a university, you can't sit here and tell me that they shouldn't be getting at least compensated a little bit from, or at least have the opportunity to be compensated from that. I'm not even saying the schools should pay them, by the way, but you shouldn't stifle the opportunity for kids to make money, especially if 99% of them aren't going to have a professional career. Like, what do we, it's like, yeah, so like, get in where you fit in. Like, college is a point to learn. Like, those are the type of entrepreneurs we should have. Like, that's entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I struggled the most with the like people couldn't go use their name and likeness to make money outside. Like that's the one I could never wrap my head around because I was like, like I played music in college too, but like if my band wanted to go set up at the local place and get paid for the night to be there, like you totally could, right? Like there's no restriction on that. If you're an artist, you could go do it. If you're a really good poet, you could go sell your stuff on the side. But it's like, but if you were an athlete, you couldn't do any of that, right? And you'd get in trouble. So, I think generally, like I'm happy in general that the rules passed. I think we're probably gonna, similar thing, need education and some other changes at some point, but I'm happy. And I also hate the NCAA in general. So,
Look at how much college coaches get paid.
Yeah.
Like, if coaches are signing for millions of dollars, and then the argument that people make is like, well, they're getting their books and food paid for.
Yeah.
Really?
We could pay for just Nick Saban's books and food, right? That'd be fine.
So let's put coaches on scholarships too. Then, if money doesn't matter, like, come on now. Yeah.
So, Lorne, you brought up that would be good entrepreneurship to be able to pay the students. So in terms of being an entrepreneur, I'm curious about kind of what are some of the challenges that you face being a young entrepreneur, and kind of what is your advice to other young, professionals who want to start their own businesses?
Yeah. You're gonna take a lot of punches. Someone asked me recently, like, what would you say is like the most important trait to being an entrepreneur? And I was like, can you eat a punch? And I mean, I could sit here for hours and just tell you the number of just terrible things that have happened to make money, and things that like most people, like when I tell them these stories, they always say, wow, like I couldn't do what you do, which is like not super comforting, by the way. But yeah, it's just, I think, and on this journey, you see people who stop you doing their company for whatever reason, like stop their journey. You've got to love what you do. Like you can't, and I'd say if you're going into a business to start money, that's a really, really rough place. I mean, it's going to be a hard thing to do. Either you have to have a heck of a business model, you need to know somebody, or you just got to be lucky. And I mean, and I tell people this, we have not made pretty much any money for the last like 3 years. And I couldn't be happier. Like the impact that we're having, the number of students that we've touched. And there are days that it sucks. Like this morning I woke up, I'm in my mom's office right now working for her so that I can pay my rent. And I'm a very happy individual. It's like you just have to get to the point, like pick something that you care about. And also pick a problem that's very obvious to you. Because to me, I see financial literacy as like, how is nobody else doing this? But then I talk to people, they're like, oh my God, this is brilliant. So it's like the things that seem simple, the problems that you can relate to, are probably the problems that you're going to have the best chance at solving. And also make plans, but know that they're going to change. Like I started this journey saying, I wanted a functioning app. I don't want to write curriculum, and I don't want to teach. We don't have a functioning app. All I do is write curriculum and teach. And like, you know what I mean? Like that's just how it goes. And like, would I change it? No, I wouldn't change it, because like we got here for a reason. I love the journey of it. But yeah, no, you gotta be able to take a punch. You gotta love what you do, and you gotta be flexible and kind of just roll with the flow.
One of the cool things too about mini money management, in my opinion, is that like the catering to communities of color and our different perspectives and experiences with money. I think that a lot of financial literacy programs as they exist don't really take into account the unique struggles that our communities face. And that's like that's what I thought was most interesting. And in terms of speaking to the unique problems that you can solve, like that's one of the things I'm most excited about mini money runners is that going into a community where, the median household income is less than $21,000 and like most of the kids are on free lunch, and then to give them some kind of tools to go out into the world, like educate them on that. Hey, y'all are starting at a little bit of a disadvantage. Here's how money works. Like, don't make these crazy mistakes. And hey, let's have some fun running too while we're at it. So I'm curious to, I don't think we've ever had a chance to talk about this, but what kind of attractors made you say yes to Jamie and I to sign on to do mini money runners, and what are you most looking forward to about it?
Yeah. I think the biggest piece about it is the running aspect. One is because I don't love running because I'm not psycho. But yeah, like running has done a lot for me. But I think it's that piece of like meeting kids where they're at. And so like if I just say, hey, look, this is just money, here's a curriculum, and you leave, it may stick, it may not. But it really is a holistic view on life, I guess. Because like once I teach you how to learn about money, or like once you know about money, well, what are you gonna do with it? Like, okay, so like if you guys love to run, it's like it puts financial education in a different box. And I think it's you get outside of the classroom, you get outside of people lecturing to you. And so then you get to really have those conversations, and you'll have kids come up to you and ask. And here, like one of the most like powerful things I think that I've like ever heard a student tell me was I was again just telling them like the background of money, telling them the emotions of money, saying like, kids who grew up poor are usually like they like things more than they like experiences because they didn't have things growing up. So that brings them more joy and happiness. Whereas, there's flip flop for kids who grew up rich. And there was a kid on the call, or there's a kid like in the class, and he like came up to me and he was like, I just want to say thank you so much because we were homeless like for like a few years of my life, and I never knew why my relationship with money was so bad. And it's like that type of a comment, like just, and like that's what I mean when I say like meeting kids where they're at, because you don't really know where everybody's background has been. But like when it comes to running, to me, running is like what is like a big equalizer, because it doesn't matter where you came from. Like if you can run, you can run. And I think like if you take that mentality and then you can apply it to money, like you can apply like, okay, this is where we're at, what are we going to do moving forward? You ran slow, what are we going to do? You made a bad mistake with your money, what are you going to do? Like there's so many similarities and parallels to it. And at the end of the day, like kids are tired of getting talked at in the classroom. So like if you can start to teach them in other environments, then they're much more receptive to it. And I mean, Jamie was like a super like influential track coach in my life. So yeah, that's my guy.
Yeah, Jamie Limon, not Jamie Hopkins. I'm just kidding.
It does
People get
confuse some
confused.
people sometimes. So it's been
I had to make the distinction.
it's been fixed. Those one time somebody, because it was early on, right? I think right after you had joined,
Yeah.
and somebody like Anna posted something with Coach Jamie on Twitter, and somebody was like, "What's going on with you two?" 'Cause I was like, "That's not me. It's totally different." Jamie.
I can see that. But yeah.
So one of the another thing I'm noticing a lot of, former college athletes in the finance space, and like you mentioned a bunch of different like things that are cross-conceptual application, as Jamie Limon likes to say, right? You that resilience that you didn't run well this time, you made a mistake with money, how are you going to bounce back? And what we call at Carson the adaptability quotient, right, Jamie? So I love that, the idea of building up somebody's adaptability and resilience, because that in the end is kind of what we need to survive in this world. So
100%.
So Lorne, we always like to close with a nice, fun, well, hopeful. So what is the impact you want to leave in this profession and in this world?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think there's such a I talk to adults a lot, so we do budgeting sessions, and we're usually working on getting people out of a financial situation. It's usually like, okay, what have you done? How can we fix it? How can we improve your relationship? I want to get to the point where like we start kids off on the right foot. So K-12, everybody's graduating thinking, okay, I know how money works. I know how money's going to fit in my life. I may not know, I may not be saving for retirement yet. I may not have all the funds, but at least I know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because that's then going to have a massive impact. If you want to talk about empowerment, if you want to talk about fixing the world, the pain, the hurt that's going on. I tell people the biggest problem we have, it's not race, it's not religion, it's class. And it's the fact that people don't know how to move money and the fact that people can't move throughout the classes. So for me, I think if we can just get to the point where money education is a second thought. It's like an afterthought. The same way that you learn math is the same way that you learn money. I'd say that would be a heck of an impact. You know what I mean? Because then I think the conversations that we start to have with kids are going to be a lot different. Like I went into a school and we talked about, so after we talked about our personal finances, we talked about entrepreneurship and what you would do if you if you had this much money, what business would you start?
Mm-hmm.
And 60% of the kids were either going to clean up the ocean, fix homelessness, or like repair the ozone. Like, so if you I think people want to help, but they just don't have the funds or like the wherewithal, or like they don't know how to do it. And so I think this is like a great step in empowering people to then go fix the stuff and like make the changes that they want to make. Because instead of worrying about like working 3 jobs and trying to put food on the table, like we get people like, okay, we can meet our basic needs. Now what do we want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think once we get there, maybe I'll take a break.
Well, you're absolutely well on your way to making that impact. So thank you so much for joining us today. And quick, before we sign off, tell people where they can find you, whether it's LinkedIn or your website, or how would you prefer people to connect with you?
Yep. So minimoney.app. So MINI money.app. Instagram's Mini Money. I think it's just Mini Money M. All the socials are Mini Money M, and then our website's minimoney.app.
Awesome. Jamie, I'll let you close it up.
Well, that was pretty good. Might have had another follow-up question or two, but it's pretty good. I do have one. Can I ask one?
Okay, go for it.
All right.
Go for it.
I'm breaking the system. Well, when you because it went through a very good legacy answer, and then I was like, but if you had the power to change one thing in the world, then to that goal, what would it be? Right? Because can I put a teaser in front of you on this too? Which goes to the question of do you believe that education alone is enough, right? Like if you had a magic wand and said, look, I can educate everybody, is that what you would pick though?
That's a tough question. Because no, education isn't gonna fix everything. There's a lot of other funding that I think, but so my thought process behind it is if I can educate everybody, you turn that into $1 billion company, and then you take that money to then do the changes that you actually need to see. You reinvest in communities. You make sure that like everybody has like equal access to like they know. And I mean, honestly, I think that like the role of governments, like what I think I would change the role of like, if I could change anything, I would change what we define as basic human needs. And I think that because right now we can be a very inhumane society.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that education is going to help. Putting money into like a functioning system will help. But if we can't get to the point where we like, you know what I'm saying, like everybody has a roof over their heads and like food on the table and like at least a little bit of love in their life, that would be, I think, the thing that I would try to change. I don't know if that's something you can change right off the bat, but
yeah. Well, somebody asked me that recently, and I when I think broad about it, there's that proposal, right, where you give every person that's born the like $1,000 a year until they're 18. And, whether or not that actually works, different argument. But, like I think it's Duke or whatever said that would essentially wipe out the wealth inequality in like, a generation, which is a pretty cool thing. Right. And it's totally doable. And you sit around like some of the stuff, some things are very hard to find solves for, but it kind of went to your point, right? Like what's the role of providing kind of basic human rights and, care for people. So, Anna, do you have one? What would you change if you could change one thing? And then I'll close this out. I promise.
Man, that is a tough one. I don't know. There are so many things I would want to change. I think a lot of the systems that are in place that have historically caused oppression to peoples in our nation, I think that I would reverse some of those and, allow for people to really have a true meritocracy, because we can't have that now with the types of systems that we've had in place in this country. That's impossible. So the myth of meritocracy, do away with that, do away with the systems that caused it, and then let everybody rise equally. So there we go.
So what?
Hey, Jamie, what was your answer?
So mine was that I would,
Thanks,
if I could do one thing, I would do the $1,000 for every kid born into the age of 18. It's the simplest, like one thing that I feel like would have an impact. There's probably other stuff I could come up with, but that's actually like it's a direct policy answer that you could implement, right? That's the way I look at it. Because there's other stuff, like I do think that like there's environmental things I think are really important. And someday, same thing. I'm like, man, like if the oceans get too messed up, like we're all gone, right? Like if the ocean somehow, like everything dies in the ocean, like it's all over here. Like there is no more life. So inequality on stuff becomes really not important.
That's a very good point.
If there's no life left on the planet, right? It's a issue. Well, all right.
Yeah.
I will close this out on that super happy note of that there would no more life on the planet. So
Wow.
people are like, wow, it went pretty well.
super
I'll do a
depressed
positive
now.
thing. So look, there's this cup that came from my daughter's school, and it's like when you put drinks in it, it changes the color. So that's pretty cool, right? And probably a lot of chemicals on it, but pretty cool nonetheless. Well, Lorne and Anna, thank you so much for the work that both of you are doing and putting this episode on here today. And thanks everyone else for listening to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast.